Roaring Timbers is one of the most elusive wooden coasters in existence. Located at Sun World Hon Thom, this GCI Wooden coaster has an aggressive layout that hugs the hilly terrain. But the thing is that barely anyone has ridden this due to its rather obscure location in Vietnam. That makes finding reviews difficult when it's a wood coaster, which depending on the conditions can beat you up. But is Roaring Timbers too rough to be enjoyed? Since Roaring Timber reviews are almost non-existent, I will review Roaring Timbers and see if it's too rough. The success of Sun World Hon Thom has been a recent and ongoing development. Located on the island of Hon Thom near Phuoc Cuoc Island, Sun World opened in 2018 with the longest cable car ever built. At nearly 5 miles long, this cable car would give picturesque views as it transported guests between islands in 15 minutes. But this was just the start for Sun World. Over the next several years, Sun World would develop the island into a resort destination. The most notable additions were the Aquatopia Water Park in December 2019 and the Exotica Village theme park in February 2022. One of these rides that opened with Exotica Village is Roaring Timbers. Roaring Timbers is a GCI wooden coaster. The coaster stands 106 feet, 32 meters tall, with a top speed of 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour, and traverses 2,920 feet, 890 meters of track. This makes it one of GCI's larger coasters, as well as Vietnam's first and only wooden coaster, and it certainly looks big too. Not only does this wooden twister don the midway, but it also sits on the side of a mountain, so it looks mighty impressive as the track hugs the hilly terrain. It would have looked great sitting on that hillside with all those trees. Unfortunately, in the big 2026, the area surrounding Timbers is an active construction site. As of right now, Sun World is building a ton of hotels, rides, and other developments. So the surrounding area near Timbers is a whole bunch of under construction buildings, which meant many of those trees had to be cut down. Roaring Timbers sits in the back of Sun World in a dead-end area. From the cable car, you have to navigate to the back and walk around Roaring Timbers to get to the entrance. But walking around Roaring Timbers, anticipation builds as when it cycles, you can hear the wooden roar. Timbers is a novelty in this part of the world. Not only does it sit on the hillside of an island, but it's also a rarity in this part of the world. See, Timbers is not just Vietnam's only wooden coaster, but one of only 3 in all of Southeast Asia. The other 2 are wooden wild mice in Indonesia. This makes Timbers a must-ride in Southeast Asia. Now, if you plan on riding Roaring Timbers anytime soon, here are some things you might need to take note of. The first is that getting here is not the easiest. I mentioned that very few people have gotten the chance to ride this. The reason for this is the location. Sun World Hon Thom is located near Phuoc Cuoc, Vietnam, a Vietnamese island off the coast of Cambodia. This explains a lot. First of all, Vietnam is desolate when it comes to major coasters. Compared to other Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, or even China, Vietnam is not seen as a coaster hotspot. It's really only this, Wrath of Zeus, Dragon's Run, and an unnamed Vekoma tilt coaster. The surrounding mainland to the island is severely underdeveloped. I'm pretty sure it's still infested with US shell bombs and Viet Cong traps. So getting here is kinda difficult. You'll need to take multiple layovers to get here. But Sun World is not located directly on Phuoc Cuoc. Instead, it's on the smaller Hon Thom Island, or Pineapple Island in English, disconnected near the south of Phuoc Cuoc. So Sun World has an extra step of needing to use a cable car or fishing boat to get to the smaller island where the park is located. Third, there's barely anything here for coaster enthusiasts. The only other major park here is Vin Wonder's Phuoc Cuoc, where Wrath of Zeus is located. So you'd be doing all that effort just for a GCI Woody in a Vekoma Firestorm. Another thing to take note of is that because Sun World is a year-round park, Timbers will sometimes have to close periodically for annual maintenance. Unfortunately, they don't list that in advance anywhere online, so you won't know unless you go the day of. Now, I believe they do disclose that on Facebook if it's maintenance, but if it's staffing, they aren't telling you shit. This is important because a ton of parks decided to do their scheduled 2-week maintenance while I was in Vietnam. For reference, both Dragon's Run at Dragon Park and Roller Coaster at Dam Sen Park were closed for 2 to 3 weeks for scheduled maintenance. Dragon Park was at least generous enough to disclose it on Facebook so I could cancel my bookings over there, but Dam Sen didn't tell shit. Then Bana Hills, another Sun World property, had all their alpine coasters closed due to weather. Speaking of weather, the third thing to note is the weather. This was not an issue during my visit, but it's worth noting because it could negatively impact your day. Because the cable car and fishing boat is the only way to and from the island, if poor weather like heavy rain or strong winds occur, you won't be able to ride it. Not just because they don't run timbers in any type of rain, but you won't be able to even go to the park. All because your mode of transportation is unavailable. In other words, you're f***ed, buddy. So make sure you visit on a clear day, and by all means avoid this park during hurricane season. But when you go, make sure you come in the morning. The cable car closes midday from 11 to 1 for inspection. So during those times, you also won't be able to go in or out of the park. But the most important thing to note is that the ride hours differ mightily from the park hours. On this day, Sun World Hon Thom and the cable car typically operate from 9 to 5. However, Roaring Timbers operate from 11 to 5. This is important because it gave me quite the anxiety when I first entered. You see, right before you enter the cable car, there's a ride availability list to see what rides are open at the moment. And this was the snapshot when I went. You see that? Yeah, you can clearly see Roaring Timbers listed as closed. This devastated me at the moment, because you're telling me I traveled all the way to Phu Quoc to ride this Woody, and you're telling me it's closed? I felt like I got obliterated by the North Vietnamese. But there was a couple things I got wrong. The first was that ride availability was listed as at the moment, not all day as I thought. The other thing was that the ride hours were never updated on the website. While the ride hours are listed from 11 to 5, as you can see on this board, the website still lists it as 9:30 to 4:45. So imagine my surprise when I'm in the water park waiting for the Sea Dragon water coaster, I see Timbers cycling 5 times. So after I went on Sea Dragon, which is a good water coaster by the way, I hightailed to Timbers. Once I got to the entrance, which first of all, they need more shade around Timbers. It's an unshaded path, which in the Vietnamese sun can and will burn you. You will feel like you got roasted alive in those Vietnamese prisons. But it's also the best place to get footage from ground level. But because of the terrain, it's also hard to get certain shots of the coaster. The best place for views is the Eagle Eye Observation Tower, but due to time constraints, I didn't go on it. Also, getting to Timbers is an absolute hike. From the cable car, you have to walk all the way back to Timbers and then walk all the way around Timbers to get to the Woody. Originally, when Exotica Village first opened, all that was back there was Timbers and Eagle Eye. But during my visit, several new kiddie rides were either open or under construction. There's no coverage of these due to the lack of Western visitors at Sun World, but they should help round out the ride lineup. But it's here where you notice how Timbers is run. Now, if you bought your tickets online, now it's a good time to pull those out, or if you bought them in person, make sure you don't discard them, because in order to ride Timbers, you have to scan your park ticket in order to enter the queue line first. Here, you will scan your ticket and face ID at the turnstiles to enter, and a manned employee will be here to check. You only need to scan it once, because if you just relapse it over and over like I did, the employee will let you in through a gate next door. Before we continue, I need to vent about this employee, because this dumbass was an absolute rage baiter. Because I kept relapsing the coaster, this op quickly started to recognize me and started calling me a good boy and saying I love you in a super gayish way. This severely weirded me out, cause why on earth are you acting like one of my super gay homies? Stop that! But after you scan, the op will tell you to put all your things in a locker. This is one of those rides where absolutely nothing can ride with you. This obviously includes bags, but also smaller items like phones, wallets, and even glasses, even if they have a strap. So obviously, that meant I couldn't film a POV of the ride. The irony is that the station platform has cubbies that were being used during my visit. This is because they don't use metal detectors at the entrance. So in theory, you could bring your stuff in the queue. Just know if you do this, the ops will force you to put everything in the cubbies. Seriously, they take safety here really seriously. When I was in the water park, the operators at the water slides told me to remove literally everything, and if the op spots an item at the entrance, they will tell you to put it in a locker. The good news is that the lockers are free. You hear that? Free lockers! Busch Gardens, take note. These lockers work similarly to Epic Universe. You will scan your face and see just how chopped you are. There, a locker will pop open for you to place your stuff in. And these lockers is decently big. You could place a mid-sized bag in there. This helps with the operations a lot since loose articles play a big part in why dispatches take so long. With that being said, the operations still suck. This was one of the first coasters I rode in Asia, so this is one of my first experiences with Asian operations, and well, they suck major ass. It takes the operators roughly around 4 minutes to load and unload the train. That's somehow on par or even worse than Iron Gwazi's dispatches. I don't necessarily blame the operators, I think it's the policies behind it. The first is that when the restraints unlock, they have to wait for everyone to leave the train. Then a grouper will let just enough people to fill the next train. Luckily, you are free to select any open row, but if the seat you want is already filled, you are allowed to wait behind the gate for the next ride. So it's extremely easy to get the seat you want, such as the very front or back, unlike some other Asian parks. Just know that if you're a foreigner, the employees only know some English and primarily speak Vietnamese. Now, if you're a single rider, the op will call for single riders to fill up any open row. Once everyone is lined up, the gates open and everyone goes straight to their seats, since in theory, they don't have any items they need to place in the cubbies. But if you do, the operators will place it in for you. But then they need to do a separate seatbelt and lap bar check. That's the reason the dispatches are so slow. This is significantly slower than other GCI Woodies I've ridden. The good news is that even with shitty operations, the wait is usually very manageable. I've heard the Vietnam parks don't usually see high crowds, and while my visit was certainly busier, it was still only around 5 minutes. Plus, Sun World was running 2 trains, which I was surprised to see. It made the wait more manageable. However, they only run 2 trains during the first half of the day. When I went back for off-ride footage during the last 2 hours, they transferred off a train, switching to 1 train ops. That sucks, because it made the wait time grow to 30 minutes, especially since, for some reason, 2 of the rows were blocked off for maintenance equipment. Okay, this has to be a Vietnam thing, because I saw the same thing happen with Wrath of Zeus. Luckily, it was the 2 middle seats, which meant I was able to ride the ends of the train. I hear it's common for them to close off the very front or very back row at times, but you know what? At least they didn't wait 15 minutes per dispatch. Yeah, that's something the park tends to do on quiet days when very few guests are at the park. Now, waiting for this will make you realize how little queue there is. Once you pass the turnstiles, it's a narrow hallway with a staircase and 2 switchbacks into the station. And note if you're disabled, the station was not designed with disabilities in mind. In Vietnam, disability laws either don't exist or nobody follows them because much of the infrastructure is not accommodating to those users. This includes Timber Station, as there was no ramps or elevators. So if you're disabled, the probability of you not being able to ride is a lot higher, as sad as it is. When you board, you're greeted with GCI's Millennium Flyer T-bars and seatbelt combo. And I like these restraints. The seatbelts do nothing and honestly only add to the slow operations, but the T-bars are comfy and designed to allow maximum airtime. Just know that the T-bars can and will try to lower during the ride, so I suggest holding on. One more thing, how far the operators push the restraints vary from person to person. In this footage, you can see 3 to 4 workers running the ride. Half of them do not staple, while the other half staple to death. So depending on where you decide to sit, you have about a 50-50 chance of your airtime getting nerfed. When you dispatch, the ride begins with a small dip into the chain lift. This lift does nothing and honestly only exists to build momentum for the lift. This lift has a variable lift speed. It begins rather slowly before suddenly speeding up. You get a good view of the layout you're about to embark on, but like I said, the surrounding area is an active construction site right now, so you currently get a good view of under construction hotels and resorts. Unfortunately, there's no recent videos online to properly showcase this. As I said, I was not able to film a POV, nor was I allowed to, and the only POVs I could find were shot in either 2022 or 2023, as evident by this drop tower in the background that was not there during my visit. Once at the top, you sharply bank right into a 270-degree turn. Right off rip, you start to lean into some faint laterals, but you keep banking to the right into the drop and don't bank out until halfway down the drop. So when you build up speed, not only are you getting some great laterals, it's also paired with a nice pop of ejector airtime. And obviously, the laterals and airtime are much stronger in the back, as well as some whip not present in the front. This is the first instance of quick ejector pops on this coaster. Once you level out, you will notice the first of a few jackhammer moments. Yeah, Timbers isn't exactly smooth. Well, which I mean, it's a wood coaster. Of course it's not smooth. But the thing is that Timbers operates year-round in a very humid climate. So Timbers pretty much is run similarly to those in southern US parks. What's interesting here is that they went with an all-wooden structure. This is peculiar because woodies built in this type of climate typically use a steel structure to reduce maintenance costs. See rides like White Lightning and Colossus, for example. So without proper maintenance, it could get brutally fast. It's also unclear how Sun World will maintain this ride since there's not another example of this. So how is Roaring Timbers riding? Well, Timbers has a slight shuffle throughout the course with 3 distinct jackhammer moments. But overall, it is rideable, as I was able to lap it 6 times. That's not something I could have done if it was brutally rough. Ironically, it's smoother than the Vekoma Firestorm on the other side of the island. The first element after the drop is one of GCI's signature turnaround elements. You first rise up in apex, getting a decent pop of floater. Once you're in the air, you sharply bank to the left, receiving great laterals. And these laterals are sustained through the bottom of this turnaround. This is an element typical on most GCIs where you get a good pop of air going into the turnaround before then getting laterals. It's a decent element that shows you what this coaster is about. At the bottom, there's this kink in the valley where the track gradually banks right, so you slightly lean to the right in this pullout. This creates a faint moment of lateral motion. You then proceed to traverse another turnaround that wraps around the drop, but this is more flat than the traditional GCI turnaround. You first rise up into the turnaround. This will give you a great sustained moment of flowjector up front, while back row riders get a milder floater airtime. I should mention that depending on whether you sit in the front, the elements you experience will differ. On some coasters, the majority of elements will hit better in either the front or the back. For example, White Lightning, another GCI Woody, is a definitive back row ride as most of the elements hit harder in the back. But on Roaring Timbers, you have elements where some will ride better in the front while the others ride the back better. So I recommend riding it in both rows to get a good feel for it. When you reach the apex, you level out to perform a tight turn around the first drop. This turn slams riders to the side as you get pummeled with decent laterals. And these laterals are semi-sustained, so you're slammed to the side for several seconds. It's one of the better moments of laterals. Then you descend down this drop, and it's actually really good. Most of Timbers consist of comfortable floater to flowjector airtime, but this drop randomly throws in sustained ejector airtime. It's shocking how powerful it is. You get thrown out of your seat into the stratosphere for several seconds. It's by far the best moment of air on Timbers, and obviously it's much stronger in the back row. Next is a speed hill. Now, despite the speed and tightness, you only get a faint float. You can forget about getting memorable air on this element. What it does deliver is the whippiness, as this is a rapid transition, so you get whipped from one side to another. However, this is another moment of jackhammer, so I would be careful. Next is another turnaround similar to the first one, this time to the right, but the banking begins the moment you start ascending, so the airtime pop you get at the apex is a bit off axis. It reminds me of the wooden version of Wrath of Zeus's off axis hill, so the airtime pop is tipsy as you get lifted at a tilt, and this pop is decent as well with quality sustained floater airtime. Maybe a little bit weaker since this is the halfway point, but still good. Then the turn leans into more laterals as well. However, the apex is the third moment of jackhammer, so be careful here. From here you reach your airtime terrain run, because this leg has a series of low to the ground bunny hills. This begins with what you'd think would be a camelback. After all, the ascent of this hill is elongated, but then the descent is a small dip. So this ascent road similarly to the ascent of the second turnaround. The front gets a strong flowjector while the back gets a weak floater, and either way you look at it, it's sustained. Next is back-to-back bunny hills followed by a sizable drop. Now if you notice, you're right up against the ground when you traverse this section. Remember how I said Timbers sits on the side of a hill? Well, the finale run of Timbers hugs the terrain as you traverse elements that sit low to the ground. The first 2 bunny hills offer quick pops of floater airtime. Nothing special, but these pops are decent and you feel some slight weightlessness. Then you bank slightly to the right as the track turns slightly, so you get mild laterals as you're tipped it slightly. Then this drop has more sustained floater airtime. Next is an overbank, and it honestly does nothing. There's no airtime or laterals on this overbank. Maybe a little bit of positive G's, but this is not what I would call forceful. Speaking of forceful, there's not a lot of positive G's on this wooden coaster. Even though I call this coaster aggressive, that's mostly because of the laterals and the airtime, not really for its positive G's. This is the one dull spot on Timbers. Next is a hop that turns left into a dip. The hop has a sharp pop of airtime that throws riders upwards. This pop is still floater, but still decent. The turn then pulls one last moment of laterals as riders get thrown to the side. By this point, you're starting to hit the finish, so the tilt isn't going to be strong, but it's still enjoyable. Unfortunately, the descending curve offers no types of airtime. It's simply too shallow to do anything. Finally, you get one more small floater pop with a hop into the brakes. This completes 2,920 feet, 890 meters of track, all while you get a good view of under construction hotels. Roaring Timbers is one of the most underrated wooden coasters out there. It may not be the longest, but it has a good layout with packed pacing. Speaking of pacing, Timbers hauls through one great element after another, especially that midpoint drop. Definitely the highlight of the coaster. And because of the terrain, you maintain your speed throughout the course. It does let its foot off the gas slightly in the second half with the airtime being weaker than the first half, but I wouldn't say it dies out after the third turnaround. It's a great ride start to finish. That's why I felt the ride completely satisfying despite the objectively short length. It is worth mentioning that I did ride this coaster on a rather hot day. This means Timbers was hauling throughout the layout, making the elements hit harder. So what would I rate Roaring Timbers? I give it a 90 out of 100. Most people don't realize this since they haven't ridden it yet, but Roaring Timbers is one of the better GCIs. It blends airtime and laterals in an aggressive twister layout on the hillside that I enjoy. I would like it to have a bit more positive G's, but that would quite literally rot the coaster to crap. Is this the best GCI Woody I've ridden? Yes, but with a slight asterisk. See, I haven't ridden a lot of wooden coasters. This is literally only the 4th coaster I've ridden from GCI, so the pool of comparisons is quite small. It is way better than White Lightning and Invader for me, as the coaster has stronger airtime and laterals. The only coaster off-rip that this can compete with is Thunderhead. However, my rides were in 2020, meaning those opinions are outdated today, as Thunderhead could be running very differently from when I rode it. So as of right now, Roaring Timbers is my favorite GCI, though that might change at the end of the year, as I do plan on riding more GCIs this year. But is it better than Wrath of Zeus? Since both properties are relatively close, you're likely to ride both on the same trip. Some people may not agree, but I like Timbers more than Zeus. Now, Zeus objectively has the better layout with a stronger variety of forces, and the best element on both coasters in this ferocious twisted camelback. But I simply have more fun on Timbers, as you simply can't get that type of sensation on a steel coaster. Plus, somehow Zeus is significantly rougher than Timbers, so that persuaded my opinions a little bit. I know Phuc Vuc is not the easiest place to get to. Heck, the only reason I was able to go was because I was in Ho Chi Minh City visiting family, and I found cheap airfares to Phuc Vuc from there. But if you're already planning to visit mainland Vietnam or the surrounding countries of Southeast Asia, I highly recommend Timbers. It's a quality wooden coaster with good airtime in a picturesque setting. So that is my review of Roaring Timbers at Sun World Hon Thom. After hearing my thoughts, does this coaster make you want to go, and is it on your bucket list? Leave all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, which you probably did if you made it this far, please leave a like. Also, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. The YouTube algorithm has been f***ing me over recently, so doing that convinces the algorithm to push this video to more viewers. Finally, watch more of these bangers you see right here. This is the Coaster Flood, riding out.